Good day to all. Welcome to Extreme Recap. The opening scene depicts a historical occurrence in 1917 during World War I, concentrating specifically on the war between Germany and France. Unfortunately, we discover that various youthful fighters have previously lost their lives preceding setting the departed German officers into final resting places. After that, their uniforms are taken off and washed. The regalia are sewn onto new apparel, which will be worn by the following clump of warriors. It has been a long time since the conflict started, and we are acquainted with a 17-year-old kid named Paul Bäumer, who Ludwig Bem, Franz Müller, and Albert Kropp, all of his friends from school, sign up for the Imperial German Army. It is uncovered that Paul's mom has prohibited him from enlisting in the military, yet Franz persuades him to produce her particular on the endorsement letter. At some point, the gathering pays attention to an enthusiastic discourse by a school official, after which they accepted their garbs. They have no idea that they belong to the soldiers who were killed in a previous battle. Unaware of the unforgiving real factors and remorselessness of the war zone, these young men are roused to go to war, only to be seen by the public as cool people. The following day, after arriving at the base camp, a doctor blocks their path and requests that the soldiers vacate their vehicle in order to transport wounded comrades to the hospital. The boys are then deployed to northern France, near La Malmaison. From that point, they all continue to stroll towards the combat zone. They walked a long distance to their hiding place, where they met other soldiers and a vice commander named Stanislaus Kaczynski. Paul and Alberta were assigned to keep watch the first night they were in the trenches. A brief time later, they hear strides and become ready. So Paul readies his weapon and outputs the region for any indications of development. After spotting something wrong, he intuitively starts shooting, accidentally uncovering their area. Accordingly, the foe fights back and shoots up Lobby's head. Thankfully, though, his helmet protects him from the bullet. The following second, the foes send off a severe assault, driving every one of the German fighters to look for shelter inside a dugout. Because they lack sophisticated weapons, Paul and his friends are forced to hide as the assault gets worse. As they face the grim realities of war, the boys' idealized view of it crumbles in order to fight the enemy. Sadly, because of the consistent besieging, the dugout implodes, catching and killing a portion of the warriors under the rubble toward the beginning of the day. Paul, who was as yet covered under flotsam and jetsam, is safeguarded by Albert and different troopers overpowered and damaged. Paul rests for a moment. Stanislaus was born during this time. In contrast to the others, a compassionate leader informs Paul of the horrors of war and gives him a piece of bread. Soon after, Apollo is allotted to the undertaking of recovering recognizable proof labels from the departed troopers' necks. He is moved to tears when he comes across Ludwig's lifeless body while doing so. Paul pauses for a minute to lament and grieve the misfortune prior to going on with his undertaking. The scene then, at that point, movements to year and a half later, where we witness a gathering between a German state secretary named Matthias Berger and the German central leadership, Trema Center. Berger attempts to persuade the high command to begin armistice negotiations with despite the mounting losses. Unified powers back on the combat zone, Paul seems to have become used to the unforgiving truth of war. One day while strolling with Stanislaus, they coincidentally find a little homestead close to the timberland. Hankering to eat something delicious after quite a while, they intend to take animals from the homestead. After successfully stealing a pet, Stanislaus enters the premises while Paul watches from the outside. They immediately take off from the scene. They then got back to the base and cook the taken food. Albert, France, and a second soldier by the name of Jaden join them for a delicious meal. In the midst of all of this, they also make fun of each other and laugh, making the atmosphere happy and letting go of the harsh reality of war. For quite a while, that rancher is pissed. However, the next morning, as the troopers set up their morning meal, they spot three ladies cruising by, having been denied of female friendship for quite a while. They are spellbound by their presence. Franz even goes above and beyond and approaches the ladies, proposing to accompany them home. The soldiers get letters from their families later that day. Since Dennis' misfortune is unskilled, and he requests that Paul read a letter from his significant other, the letter depicts the amount she misses. Dennis is fond of and longing for them to visit their child's grave together. Stanislaus says that after hearing this, he feels like a loser because his child had been sick for a long time before passing away. In any case, he couldn't visit his child in any event, for a solitary time frame. He also worries that he won't be able to rejoin the society of the peacetime. As per Stanislaus, the public authorities' commitments of significant pay rates have caught them. Be that as it may, as a general rule, the genuine worth of the wages is useless, especially in light of the unpredictability of surviving the wars. That very evening, Franz gets back to his kindred fighters and relates his involvement in the ladies. He brings a handkerchief from one of them as a keepsake and offers it to Paul so he can smell the woman and experience her scent. Don't snicker. It is not shady. It's contacting. The following day, Paul, Albert, Franz, Stanislaus and Jaden are relegated to the assignment of finding the dead assortments of 60 warriors who fell during the new assault in France, almost a neglected rail track. Stanislaus finds a lingering trace of the poisonous gas that the French had previously used while searching. Thinking that the warriors might have looked for nearby, the gathering enters a close-by stockroom. After a thorough search of the area, they come across a room containing the dead bodies of all 60 soldiers. After seeing the horrendous sight, Stanislaus says that the warriors probably capitulated to an unreasonable portion of harmful gas, reasonable because of untimely expulsion of their gas veils. Then again, Erzberger and a few other German representatives poured a train to the timberland of Kampen for truce discussions. Fredericks, a general, is against the idea of mistress talks because he fears that the French will try to negotiate unfair terms. Even though Germany does not have any cutting-edge equipment, he still believes it can win the war. Subsequently, General Friedrich educates his men to plan for an assault before French fortifications show up that evening. Erzberger and the representatives show up at the backwoods of Compiègne. While Paul's regiment is dispatched to the bleeding edges to get ready for an attack on the French, the following morning, the German representatives, drove by Erzberger, meet with their French counterparts and make a ceasefire request, pointing out how many German soldiers have been killed in the conflict. A negotiation contract is presented by the French Supreme Allied Committee, giving the Germans 72 hours to accept the non-negotiable terms imposed by the Allies. Nonetheless, until the settlement is marked, the conflict will proceed unabated. In the meantime, the German soldiers begin their assault on the battlefield, engaging in intense close-quarter combat to secure the French front line. Sadly, their progress is stymied by a combined arms counterattack by the French, who use Saint-Chamond tanks to break through the German defenses. The German soldiers tried to fight back against the tanks, but the bullets didn't do much, leaving them vulnerable as the tanks smashed their positions relentlessly. Furthermore, the French troopers utilize progressed fire hurlers to burn their adversaries, and unfortunate Albert becomes one of the survivors of the blazes. Paul experiences a wave of panic as he sees this horrifying sight, but he manages to continue retreating back to their trench. When he arrives, the administrator promptly arranges Paul to accumulate however much ammo as could reasonably be expected and retreat without time for examination. All hurriedly does as asked and starts to run towards well-being. However, he unfortunately slips and falls into a crater in the perilous no man's land along the way. Now that the adversary is approaching, he reacts quickly and pretends to be dead, but to his surprise, he sees a French soldier standing behind him and ready to fire. Maybe Paul will meet his end. Yet, all of a sudden, a German friend shows up at the scene and shoots the French officer, making him fall into a similar hole. Paul seizes the opportunity, grabs his knife, and while Paul watches the French soldier die, he repeatedly stabs him. Gradually, Paul becomes overcome with guilt, and he begs for forgiveness from the dead soldier's body while searching for the soldier's belongings. Paul comes across a picture of the soldier family. This strengthens his responsibility, and he starts sobbing hysterically. The German delegates go over the terms of the negotiation once more in the train, which appear to encircle Germany. As a result, a senior official raises an objection, claiming that signing the agreement would be interpreted as surrender. He would prefer to lose the conflict with honor. In any case, Erzberger contends that the choice ought not be founded exclusively on winning or losing, yet on the a great many youthful German troopers who are frantically battling a conflict which is unwinnable. A couple of hours in the wake of sending the understanding duplicates to the higher government authorities, and Erzberger gets directions from the field marshal to acknowledge the united terms. The representatives from both countries then get together to continue their negotiations. The French delegation is reassured by Erzberger that their government will do everything in its power to fulfill Francis's demands. He signs an armistice agreement with the two other German delegates that will go into effect at 11 a.m. The extremely following day. With this, the French delegates at long last proclaim the finish of the conflict somewhere else. Paul advances back to the base and finds the troopers cheering over the looming end of the conflict. Inside the clinical office, he tracks down Jaden, who is genuinely injured in the legs. Maybe he is at no point ever going to stroll in the future. After that, Jaden pulls out Francis's scarf and reveals that the bereaved boy also passed away from his injuries. France enraptured Francis' hanky around his neck as a recognition with overwhelming sadness. He then makes his way to the kitchen, where he sees Stennis once more. Louse, together, they bring nourishment for Jaden and give him a spoon and fork to eat up. Sadly, Jaden, who was upset at being disabled, commits the incomprehensible with a similar fork. The soldiers at the base camp learn of the official ceasefire the following morning. As Paul gets up, he asks Stanislaus questions when he sees him staring out the window. Stanislaus communicates that it is the most tranquil day since he came to the conflict. Since without precedent for 4 years, he hasn't heard a solitary sound of discharges to praise their newly discovered opportunity, the two companions choose to take from the homestead again. En route, Stanislaus energetically says that he can hardly hold back to firmly get back and embrace his cherished spouse. They finally reach the farm after a long walk. Paul quietly gets inside, while Stanislaus stands, sloss watch. Paul runs over some duck eggs and stuffs them in his pocket. But during this, a young boy captures him and quickly calls his father and him. The last option understands that he is again being burglarized, so he snatches his weapon and starts shooting at Paul. Fortunately, the two warriors figured out how to escape solid once at a protected distance. They air out the eggs and alternate eating them. As Stanislaus steps away to urinate in the woodland, the homestead proprietor's child unexpectedly shows up from behind, pointing his weapon at them. Paul hears a gunshot the next instant, so he rushes to Stanislaus and finds him wounded. The slug seems to have entered the right piece of his stomach. Paul carries his wounded companion back to the base for medical assistance, terrified. Be that as it may, regardless of his earnest attempts, Stanislaus unfortunately dies because of inordinate loss of blood. Paul is shaken by this. The war has completely broken him, as he has now witnessed the loss of all of his friends. Later on, every one of the warriors are called to gather in the yard where General Friedrich conveys news that they will before long be getting back to their families. Be that as it may, in an astounding turn, Friedrich, driven by his craving for a German triumph, mulls over one last assault to start at 10:45 a.m. Not long before the planned truce at 11. He orders the soldiers to take territory before the ceasefire goes into effect, despite the possibility of casualties. Regardless of their reservations, the warriors are constrained to comply with these higher orders. In the following scene, the officers hesitantly advance back to the war zone, sending off the assault exactly at 10:45 a.m. according to the order. Paul participates in battle, determinedly, taking out whatever number French troopers as could be expected under the circumstances. Amidst the turmoil, Paul comes to the guide of a youthful German enlist. However, while doing so, he becomes a French soldier's target. As they come face to face, Paul and the French soldier both fall into a bunker. They wait for the clock to strike 11 before freezing. However, when another French soldier fatally stabs Paul in the heart from behind, their encounter is abruptly cut short. Seconds after the fact, the conflict is formally proclaimed over, and the sound of authorities' voices yelling truce resounds through the air with his last piece of solidarity. Paul staggers out into the channels, savoring the finish of the conflict before at long last capitulating to his wounds. A brief time later, a recently shown-up German enroll whom Paul had recently saved, is entrusted with gathering recognizable proof labels from fallen fighters. As the enlist does this dismal obligation, he runs over Paul's dormant mud-shrouded body in a token of regard. He gets Francis' scarf from him and folds it over his own neck. In any case, the select decides not to take Paul's ID tag, bringing about his demise going unrecorded. This implies that the courageous Paul will always stay obscure in true records. Turn on notifications, please subscribe for more videos like this, and like the channel to support it. Thank you very much.